Welcome back, America. We have a special guest. It's really an honor to have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the program. Mr. Prime Minister, a lot has been said about what's going on in Israel. Most of it's wrong. You have a Supreme Court in Israel, basically a handful of lawyers who essentially appoint themselves to the court with the help of other lawyers. And since the 1990s, they have effectively empowered themselves to have the final say on really all matters Israel, including changing laws, rewriting laws, taking laws that are passed by the Knesset and rejecting them based on something called the reasonableness standard. Now, in our country, we don't have something called the reasonableness standard because that means these lawyers basically can decide whatever they want. Reasonableness means anything, and it means nothing. And you are trying in a very modest way to get consensus to address this. Can you explain to the American people what you're doing?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, in the last 30 years, Israel has undergone a judicial revolution by the most activist judicial court on the planet. And systematically, the court arrogated to itself the powers of the legislature and the executive. And we're trying to bring it back in line somewhat to what Israel was in its first 5 decades and what most democracies are today. So we want to obviously create a system of checks and balances. The reasonableness clause that we have says that you don't eliminate it altogether, but you say that it's not enough to decide to nullify a government decision or a law based on something, on something subjective, like an argument, I think this is unreasonable. And so there are limitations on this. Well, this, this is what you have in all democracies. And this is presented by our opponents as being this awful end to democracy. If that's the case, you have no democracies anywhere else on earth. And of course, you have to remember that the court has a lot of other checks. I mean, they can disqualify appointments by saying there's conflict of interest or undue process, you name it. But you do say that you cannot disqualify things simply because you find it unreasonable. And I think that's, that's long overdue. This comes after we put forward a much more encompassing reform, and we sort of trimmed it down in order to try to reach consensus. I gave 3 months of negotiations, got nowhere with the opposition that is held hostage by an extreme minority that organizes all these protests and demonstrations. And so I decided to pass the reasonableness clause. But right now, having done that, I'm still trying to get a consensus for the amendment because I think it's better for a democracy that judicial changes are done with as broad a consensus as you can. That's basically where we are objectively. It's not what you read, it's not what you hear, it's not what the news media are covering. They're just wrong.
Now, Mr. Prime Minister, your opposition parties have really organized most of these protests, and they haven't been secret about it, although the media seems to ignore it. We're talking about opposition to you, to your majority, your coalition. They have not accepted the results of the election. And as I see it, they're trying to overthrow your government. They're trying to get your government to back off. By the way, that's how Ehud Barak sees it, a former prime minister who's helped organize this effort, and many, many others. You have all kinds of dark money seeping into your country, even from outside your country. You have all kinds of mouthpiece surrogates in the media like Thomas Friedman and others who are trying to undermine your government and have never supported your government. Isn't this really a way to try and destroy the coalition that you've put together with the overwhelming support of the Israeli people?
Well, the organizers of the demonstrations say so openly. In fact, they began their efforts well before we established the government or put forward the judicial reform. They just say, listen, we have to bring down, this is a center-right government, and they want a left government. They don't want us in power. They want to be in power, except they can't get it through elections. So they're trying to do it through these massive disruptions, blocking roads, setting up fires, blocking the airport, things of that sort. Which and the other thing they're trying to do is basically, I would say, assemble a cast of former generals who tell you that, or basically telling the government, If you don't do what we say, if you go ahead with legislation, then we're going to incite for mass disobedience in the army. I'll tell you, the day that Israel's elected government succumbs to threats by former generals, that's the end of democracy, and we're not going to let that happen. That's where we are today, and we're not letting it happen.
In America, we have a word for that. It's called treason. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, don't you find it odd, all these other countries trying to interfere in your internal affairs on behalf of a judicial oligarchy, which is really anti-democratic, while in many of these other countries, their leaders are trashing their courts and their Supreme Courts left and right all the time? Do you tell any country like the United States how they should conduct themselves when dealing with their courts?
No, I don't. I've been in power elected again and again 6 times democratically, and it's a total of 16 years. And in all these 16 years, I never commented on the internal debates in other democracies. I've just chosen not to do that now. Other leaders, elected leaders, can decide to do that in Israel. Everybody has an opinion on Israel. They don't have an opinion on the riots in France or the protests that are there or the debates that happen inside other countries. You have a major debate between the Supreme Court and the executive right now in America. I really don't care to comment about it, but if people choose to comment about ours, it's okay. We'll make our own decisions. You know, in democracies, sovereign states, sovereign democracies, the elected representatives of the people make the decisions, and that's how it's going to be in Israel. And by the way, my criticism to my opponents is not that they're engaged in treason. I don't think that's the issue. It's just illegitimate and wrong. What we're doing is not weakening Israeli democracy. We're strengthening it. We're bringing it back in line to where most democracies are, where Israel was in its first 5 decades, and where it should be now in the coming decades.
Well, that's why I would call you the peacemaker with the pacemaker, because I'm definitely not the peacemaker, and I don't have a pacemaker yet.
You stole that from one of my aides, but that's fine.
Well, why not? Here's the thing. Is it not odd to you that you are the one in your party and your coalition are promoting democracy for the voters, for the people of Israel? And that's called dictatorship. And the other side is fighting like hell to defend a judicial oligarchy, because the oligarchy, let's be honest, that oligarchy goes one way. It's hard left. They appoint each other. It's incestuous and so forth, because it helps the minority parties in your state. It helps the opposition parties, I should say, in your country. No?
Well, you know, I think that there are political motives, obviously, very strong political motives here, but I think there are also misconceptions, just wrong concepts. What is democracy? Democracy balances the will of the majority with the rights of individual rights, or the rights of the minority, as some people say. Now, how do you achieve that balance? Well, the founding fathers of the United States came up with the only formula that works. And that formula means that there is a balance of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. That's what guarantees the proper balance between the will of the majority and the rights of the minority. That balance has been thrown off the rails in Israel by the most, as I said, the most activist judicial court anywhere on earth. And so we're trying to restore it. That is said to be an affront to democracy. In other words, the idea is it doesn't make any difference whom you elect. You elected a government, you voted for this or that policy. You don't decide. You know, these 15 people, by the way, they're respectable people. They're good jurists. I don't have anything bad to say about them as individuals. But they have not been elected, and they're often self-selecting. They will decide instead of the people. Now, obviously, we cannot have the other side, that the elected legislature or government can do anything they want without judicial review. There is a balance there. We're trying to restore the balance. That is said to be the end of democracy, and this is just silly.
Well, you got your hands full, and despite that, you're really doing a fantastic job from my perspective. And I want to thank you again, Mr. Prime Minister. Best to you and your family.
Thank you.